Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. It's the Chilling Wargamers. I know it's been a little while, but as some of you may have heard, my regular co-host Spud has been having some major life rearranging at the moment. So it's going to be possibly a couple more weeks before we get into our regular schedule of episodes, but for now you can just deal with these rather sporadic ones. But I'm joined, filling the rather sizable boots of Spud this week, joined by Stevie the Maniac, of course.
Yes.
How are you doing, Mr. Stevie?
I'm good. I just can't remember what I need to do and say anymore.
Oh dear. Well, we do kind of have two guests for you. It's kind of one and a half at the moment. I'll explain that in a second. But I think it's safe to say that the word legend is thrown around a little too frivolously these days. But I don't think anyone would complain about me applying it to the two guests that we have today, because we have the dynamic duo of kind of Ronnie Renton and Jake Thornton. Hello.
Hello, folks.
Now I should explain that Ronnie is not in the country at the moment. He's currently... We're back. It's the Chilling Wargamers.
Oh
dear.
dear.
It's been a while, but as some of you may know, who's watching the video, makes a major life rearranging at the moment. Who's that? So it's going to be possibly a couple more. I think it's Jake.
Sorry, that's me. Sorry, it's technology.
What a start.
Pencil and paper, that's me.
Okay. We kind of have Ronnie with us, but I believe he's in Spain, naked at the moment, and Google seemed to cotton onto that pretty quick whenever he comes into the Hangout and kicks him straight off. So he may be dropping in intermittently.
Once he puts the shirt on.
We'll have to wait and see. He has been in a couple of times already, so let's just hope that we can get him for slightly longer in a minute. However, we are here today to talk about Dungeon Saga. First of all, so, you know, most people know all about Dungeon Saga already, but there are one or two sad, lonely individuals out there who know nothing about it. They haven't watched any of the videos, including the wonderful interview I did with you at the Games Expo this year.
Can there be such people?
I think there are one or two of them out there, yes, as odd as that may seem. There are people that were in a coma for a few weeks, and they've just snapped out of it now. The first thing they've done, loaded up Chilling Wargamers. They've never heard of this Dungeon Saga, and they want you to...
we want me to explain it to them?
Yeah, they want you to lay down some information on them.
Okie doke. Well, Dungeon Saga. Dungeon Saga is a board game where 4 heroes have come together to thwart this major evil, bad thing that's going on, which is to do with a necromancer Mortibus, who has gained control of a fabled book of magic. It's one of the original books of magic and is very powerful, and he's busy trying to work out what he can do with it, which is mostly lots of very naughty things that people don't want him to do. So the alliance of what amounts to the good races in Mantic, in Mantic's universe, have sent some heroes to go and stall him for a bit. Now they're not expected to do very well, but they're gonna, you know, they've got to do something. They've got to set some people off. So it's a board game that is set in a dungeon. One side is a group of heroes, the other side is an undead necromancer with lots of skeletons and zombies and undead trolls and all sorts of unpleasantnesses. And you play the game with is a series of tiles that you lay out in different patterns to make different combinations of rooms and corridors and so on. And each scenario gives you a different set of rooms and corridors and a different layout to play in, and a different setup of defenses and different objectives to achieve. So you tell the whole story of what happens to the heroes, and the necromancer is told through a series of these different scenarios, with the heroes trying to variously sort of rescue things and find out artifacts and break through magical wards to get to and fight sort of mini bosses, as it were, to finally get to the necromancer at the end and stamp on him. The rules come in 2 levels of complexity. We've got the core rules and the advanced rules. The core rules are designed to be it's a sort of two different ways of playing the game. The core rules are designed to be a sort of pick up and play game where you can just open the box, look at what you've got in the way of, pick a scenario to play, look at what the scenario says you need to do, lay it out, and then just go straight on and play. It tells you all you need to know in each game. It tells you what the heroes have got. It tells you which heroes are in each adventure, and it's dead straightforward. And it's kind of a simple game to pick up and play. The advanced game says, okay, let's build on that. If you want to know how to build your own dungeons, if you want to know how to gain experience with the heroes in your own way, because they do gain experience in this series of adventures, but we tell you how that happens in the core game. In the advanced game, we say, well, you give lots of choices, and so that's the choice is the key difference in the two ways of playing. So you've got this core game and the advanced game. So that's two ways of playing to start with, and that's a good start. But we've also got lots of different ways of playing within the core game. So if you talk about the core game for a bit, the game can take up to 5 players. So you start with there's 4 heroes and there's 1 necromancer. So you start with 2 players. 1 player plays the necromancer, 1 player plays the heroes. But if you've got a 3rd player, then you split the heroes between the 2nd and 3rd player. So 1 person still plays the necromancer, but the heroes are divided by 2 players, and then you can go up to 5 players altogether, with 1 player taking a part of each of the heroes. And in that case, as soon as you have more than 1 hero playing, more than 1 player playing heroes, you've got a cooperative game, rather than a sort of head-to-head game, which is what you've got when you've got 2 players. And lots of people are saying, are we going to do AI rules to play the dungeon, as it were, so that you can all play together as the heroes? And certainly all those things are possible. It's one of the things about Kickstarter. It's you never know quite where you're going to get to, and so what expansions and extras and so on that's going to fund. I expect we'll get there. I think that's quite a popular one, and that will come fairly early. But
if people want it, it tends to happen, and then you can just say, yeah, we were planning it all along.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. When you start a Kickstarter, you've got to be prepared for it to go bonkers, just in case. So you make a big long list of things you would like to do, and expect not to get all the way to the end. I mean, you don't think, you go, well, we guess we're going to do this, but let's plan for more anyway, just in case. Because it's far better to plan and not need it than it is to be standing around going, oh my God, what do we do now? What do we do now? And then everybody goes, well, you don't have a clue, do you? So we've certainly talked about it. We planned that as the AI systems I've done AI with Mars attacks, and I've done AI with 2 different versions of AI with Henchmen. So that's kind of something we've talked about a lot over the last few Kickstarters. So that's been quite popular with them. So that was another one that sort of naturally came onto the list as something we could do. And because I like playing the Necromancer, I think it's quite a strong thing for Dungeon Sagas that you don't see a lot of, is the ability to play as the bad guy, as it were, and actually not just be someone who sets up the dungeon for the heroes to win. Because a lot of games, what I get from people's comments is very much that people see playing the Necromancer as a short straw. Someone's got to play the bad guys so the heroes have someone to beat up, and that's not how Dungeon Saga works. The Necromancer has as much chance of winning as the good guys, and he has the same ability to grow and get experience, and his monsters get better, and his heroes get better, and he gets more available resources. So as the heroes ramp up and gain experience and skills and new things they can do, so does the Necromancer. And so I think it's a very different style of play. You have instead of 1 or 2 heroes to control, you've got a dungeon full of undead. So it's a very different kind of game from that side of the fence, but I want to make it as much fun and as rewarding to play in the long term, which is something I just don't think we've seen a great deal of in this genre of games.
If you look at the group dynamics in other kinds of games, like role-playing games, you often find that there's one creative type in the group who's always the dungeon master, or whatever term they use in that particular game, and they're just shaping the world around the players, and they take their satisfaction from that and watching the players eventually beat it, or all be horribly killed. If that's
I mean that's fine in role-playing games, but as a board game, I mean, there's got elements of that kind of, if you take all of the possible things we could do in the advanced game, you end up somewhere approaching that. But I don't think we ever get there. It's not supposed to be a role-playing game. And the idea of being able to build your own dungeons is great. But at the end of the day, and especially in the core game where you're saying, here's a pre-written scenario, you've got this side, you've got these heroes, you play this, you've got these monsters, and you do this. You're playing not for the sort of just to put tiles down and show what the other person's doing. You have a side to play. You've got an objective to do. You can win the game by defeating the heroes. And I think that there's always people have a creative outlet in that they can assemble. They can design their own dungeons. But at the same time, they can design them in the sense that there's an old game called Dungeon Keeper, I think it was, where you were this dungeon keeper. You set up your dungeon, and then heroes came in and you tried to kill them all. And that was great fun as an idea. I think that's quite fun. It's a different kind of thing from being a dungeon master in a role-play game. I think you're right about what the creative people with that kind of creative outlet. That's what they do in that environment. But I think this is slightly different because it isn't a role-playing game.
Yeah. There's been a Kickstarter that I've backed called Wrath of Demons. And they use a system with like cards and a spinner, so that controls like essentially the enemy because you play as the pilgrims. So it's similar. You can't really create your own dungeon though, but that might be an idea for.
I think there's lots of ways you can have a sort of AI dungeon where it's really quite common these days. Is you get these cooperative games where everyone's playing nice and no one's the bad guy, and you're playing against the game, and that works fine. Apart from, I think that you never get as interesting an opponent against a random set of cards or tables or whatever it is that generates the randomness of the game. It's never as interesting as someone who is actively trying to beat you.
Once you've played enough times, you'll figure out how to outsmart whatever the randomly determined cards or whatever will come up with.
Yeah, but this kind of monster always does one of these three things. So if you just set yourself up so that can't get you, then you're completely safe. And you then play a game which has got effectively perfect information. You know what the enemy is capable of doing, and so you can mitigate that before it happens if they're using a fixed set of tables or fixed set of dice rolls or whatever. Whereas if you're playing against a real living person, they may do something completely peculiar that you would never, you haven't thought of, you haven't foreseen, because they're deliberately just throwing a spanner in the works. And, so I think that whilst it is something that we will almost certainly get to, is doing an AI version to control the necromancer, I think at the same time you will never get as exciting a set of games as you will against playing against a real live opponent. And also, the other thing is, I would quite like, while we're doing AI, if we get to AI, I think we ought to be able to play as the Necromancer. If we're playing solo games, I'll play as the Necromancer against an AI hero party. I think that would be fun. And then we get the entertaining thing where we can play the AIs against each other and see what happens.
That's quite cool.
That would be interesting.
Which is just a kind of mental idea. I thought, well, if you have both, I mean, it's the thing to try.
Now, for gamers like me who started off on the likes of Hero Quest, like I can see behind you there,
you can indeed.
It's very exciting because there's been a lot of games in the meantime between then and now, but none of them, at least in my opinion, really captured the same kind of magic that the early games had. So hopefully this will be the one.
Yeah, I mean, there's always one of those things where you can't replicate the sort of sprinkle of nostalgia that things have from when they were the first things you played. And actually, a lot of games that I have quite a lot of nostalgia for, I've learned not to go back and play again because they're often far more rubbish than I remember them as being. And the fun times I had were more of a case, I think, or more to do with the fact that I was playing with my mates and it was all new and fresh and I didn't know what was going on. It was all exciting. And that it could have been one of a number of things, and it wasn't so much the game itself as the environment and the time and the sort of place in my gaming history. But there are, however, these things, the things that stay as classics, usually worth going and looking at and seeing what is it about this that caught people's imagination.
If you're able to recapture the feel of the old games without just replicating them, then that seems to be the best thing to do.
A lot of them are very, they're very old-fashioned in their mechanics, and they're quite clunky at times. And so you don't necessarily want to actually, you don't want to emulate that mechanical sort of clunkiness. But you're right. I mean, if you can get the sort of vibe, if you can get the feeling and the excitement and that sort of the atmosphere that worked in a new game, then I think that's great.
On the subject of the mechanics, will people that played Dwarf King's Hold be immediately familiar with how this game works?
Largely, yes. There is the core dice mechanic about how you hit people is the same. I've explained it differently because I've thought of another way of explaining it that's a little easier to get used to if you've not played it before. But the actual mechanic is the same, because I think that mechanic is actually doing a great number of things in the background that enables me to not have other mechanics. So it's doing things about making undead not care about enemy positioning. Without there being a rule for it, it's just intrinsic within the rules of the normal fighting mechanics that that's a side effect. But it does. I mean, that's why it's working like that, because it was designed to be a mechanic that works with the undead. The stats were set up to work with these undead. So it's a mechanic I'm quite fond of, because, as I said, it does. Once you've got your head around it, it's actually fine. It's very easy to use. It's unusual to start with because it uses a system that does two things at once. Whereas people are used to rolling one thing and then reading that, and then rolling something else and then reading that. In this one, you roll once and you read twice. You roll the dice and then you read it to see what the armor is, and you spin dice for that, and then you read it to see what the results are in that fight. Anyway, we lost somebody. We lost Steve.
Oh, Stevie's dropped out temporarily.
Anyway, so yes, mechanically, in that sense, that core mechanic of fighting and so on, you'll recognise that. The token system that uses the action token system that is in the original Dwarf King's Hold series has been taken out and replaced in the part of the Necromancer, who has the most similar resources in terms of models to original Dwarf King's Hold. They've got a similar kind of side of men to use. They have a slightly different system, but it's a related sort of mechanic for driving what they can do within a turn. The heroes are much more straightforward. They can always do something. They can always move and then always do one action, and that's what they do. They move, then they do an action, and the action could be one of a number of things depending on who they are. So mostly that's move and fight. That's basically what you start off doing, and then on top of that very simple system, you say if you've got a bow you can shoot, so you can move and shoot. If you've got spells, you can cast spells. And then some skills will allow you to do other things, or you could, instead of fighting against an opponent, you could smash a door down at the end, and so on. There's a number of different things. But basically, the fundamental way heroes work is they get to move, and then they get to do something. They get an action.
Yeah, when it comes to Mantic games, I would never really be too concerned with the rules being complicated, because pretty much all the game systems, it's a simple set of rules, and then they're quite intuitive as well from one rule to another. So if you know how one works, then you can easily figure out the rest of them. That's what I've found. Is that seems to be the Mantic ethos.
I think that's just a good design. I think if you can get it set up so that it's straightforward and that you can go, oh well, I know some of it, so I can guess that bit. I think that's great. I think that as you say, if it's intuitive, if it makes logical sense to someone who knows half of it, they can guess what most of the rest of it does. Then that means that it's just that much easier for people to remember. It's that much easier for people to learn in the first place. And when you want to do any sort of expansion, you can just, people have half of it in their head before you even write it, because they know what makes sense. That if you say a goblin is like this, that means he should do that. So when you explain to people what the background is, and then the rules follow naturally, I think it's a case of sort of natural design in a sense.
Now, does the story follow on as well from Dwarf King's Hold?
The story is on a sort of different scale in that it's got much bigger. So Mortibris is the sort of driver behind the whole story, because he's the necromancer from the first game, and he's come back, and this time he's more powerful. He's older, he's more powerful, and he has found his way into the warded and barred dungeon where they have kept this Book of Valador, one of the original books of magic, that is hugely powerful, and everyone realised was so powerful they just had to lock it away somewhere, because it's something you just couldn't let anyone have. And this was supposedly safe, and he's found a way of getting in, but now he's in, he can't get out, or he doesn't want to get out without working out how to use the power. And he's sort of in the dungeon working out what he can do with it, which is quite a long piece of research. And while he's doing that, the allied forces, the elves and dwarves and humans, who put it there in the first place and keep sort of regular tabs on it to make sure it's still there, have discovered that the wards have been broken and someone's got in. And so they realise what's going on, and they think, well, when he comes out, just outside where it's being held is a massive field that has been fought over for generations. As soon as he gets out here, he's going to raise the biggest undead army the world has ever seen. That would be bad. So if that happens, we're going to need an incredibly big army very much instantly. Otherwise, he's just going to rampage across everything, and it's going to be very seriously bad news. So everybody, the three powers basically go, right, we're going to raise the biggest armies we can and park them outside this place, outside the dungeon, in case he gets out. It's going to take us a while to arrange that, so in the meantime, who have you got lying around we can send to try and slow them down? So they go, oh, I've got this hero, this famous chap who'll go off and do, So each of them sort of come up with somebody, because they don't want story. They don't really want. They have to go as a group because they don't really trust each other entirely. So that's why you get one elf, one dwarf, and two humans from different aspects of the human culture. Two different cultures. So they've gone up. Basically, they've gone in on their own, without the powers that be, without the kings and princes behind them really expecting them to survive for very long. But they're going to slow him down. They're going to occupy Mortibris when he would otherwise be busy working out how to get the Book of Valador to summon this immense army. Meanwhile, everyone can get their own armies in place. So it's kind of a sort of holding action. I mean, it would be lovely if the heroes get to the end and kill Mortibris and everything's tidy. That would be great. Can they do it? Well...
It would be great, but it sounds like you're cheating yourself out of a giant, sprawling Kings of War campaign then.
Well, I mean, there is always that possibility. I mean, if Alessio, if they get out, then that's possibly going to be a very large, sprawling undead army going all over the place. But yes, I mean, we'll have to see what happens. But that is the background in a nutshell. It's Mortibris having been. He doesn't do a lot of public work, but he turns up every now and again, and when he does it, quite important. But it's the other forces. It's the alliance of the dwarves, the elves, and the different humans who have held this book in secret and kept it safe, and who are now doing what they can to keep it safe and to stop him. So that's the backstory. So it does kind of all tie in, and as you've said, the potential for taking this on in other directions is quite big.
Now, on the game pieces, from what I've seen, they all appear to be one piece. Is that the case?
They'll all be one piece when you get them. The way that Mantic have gone with Mars Attacks is the kind of the model that they're using on this. They were able with Mars Attacks to get really detailed models that were assembled at the factory. So basically, the idea was we worked out some nice models, got some nice models sculpted, sent them to the factory, and said, make these in however many bits you need to make them really good. So some of them are in single piece, some of them are cut up into 2 or 3 pieces, but before they come back from the factory, they're cast, and then they're assembled. So they stick them together at the factory so that when you get them, they're one piece. But the advantage of doing it this way, it costs a bit more to do it like this, but the advantage is that the end user opens a box, has the toy soldiers they need in one piece ready to roll. And it means that also, because you assemble them from however many bits they need to cast properly, you get really nice quality miniatures. You don't have to compromise on the quality of the figure to get the detail in. And I think that is kind of a very good compromise from saying that we want single piece figures because it's convenient when you get them out of the box, but we want detail. We want fine miniatures. We want lots of, we don't want to kind of have blobby toy soldiers. Like the old army men you got in a bag down the local newsagents. You don't want that. That's just not what people will accept these days. So it's kind of both. It is and isn't one piece. It's like this. It's the same thing that you get on Mars Attacks. It's also the same thing you get in things like brain's not working. Dust. Dust uses the same principle. They get somebody in China to assemble them for them. Those miniatures aren't made in one piece. They're made in separate bodies, arms, legs, whatever. They are assembled by the factory and then shipped to the customer in one piece.
So they're coloured plastic, aren't they?
Yeah, they'll be coloured so that the undead are one colour, the heroes are another colour, and the monstrous heroes, the undead heroes, will also be in the hero colour, as it were. So you can tell at a glance which ones are which.
That does lean towards it being beginner friendly as well, so people can just take it straight out of the box and just immediately start playing it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all very well making things that are fine for geeks with 20 years modelling experience. But at the end of the day, you're never going to get new blood into the hobby if you don't make it accessible to people who want to start, who think it's already cool, but they don't know where to begin. And I think this is the quality of figures they're able to get. I mean, the Mars Attacks one said is a good example. There'll be that quality, and I think anyone who's seen the Mars Attacks figures, the final production figures, has been really impressed by the level of detail they've been able to get. And I think so. You get a game that it comes out of the box in coloured plastic, but actually you can paint them, and it doesn't matter what colour they were to start with because you just prime them and get on, spray them up and then paint them anyway.
Yeah, there's something I remember hearing about Dreadball. Obviously, there's the people that are just into miniatures games that got it, and then there was people who saw it as a board game and then opened it and thought, "What's going on here?" and then contacted Mantic asking why all the pieces were broken. So
Absolutely.
There obviously are those people out there.
There are indeed, and it's one of those things. I mean, it's. I think if they ever go and do another version of Dreadball, I think if we get a second edition of Dreadball at some point, it will have single piece figures in it, precisely for that reason. Because if you want them in, if you're building if you're a veteran gamer, you can convert things anyway. It's not helping you particularly. And even, I mean, most people I know who have gamed for years and routinely build models from Games Workshop or Mantic or Infinity or whoever, they would happily have someone else build the models for them a lot of the time, because that's not generally seen as the most exciting part of the whole hobby. Cleaning figures up and sticking the arms on. When if the arm goes on one way, it's just a chore to put it on. I mean, it's only when you have the option to repose things that it starts becoming interesting. Assembling a model that only assembles in one way is just a chore.
I did actually slide a knife into my finger the other night as well, cleaning up a piece of dead zone terrain, so it can be dangerous.
It can be dangerous, absolutely. I mean, and again, if you want to get kids into the hobby, giving them something they need modelling knives to use is something that starts becoming a problem very quickly if you start sticking them in your fingers. So it's and I think it's true that there's in any hobby, whether this is fishing or modelling or gaming, you need to continually think about where the next generation is going to come from, and be proselytizing the entertainment value you get out of it to kids. I mean, and kids, obviously, if kids don't like games, then you're in trouble.
Right. So one more thing on this from me before we go to some audience questions.
Yeah.
A lot of people have sprues of Mantic models that they've got from the various crazy box deals, that kind of thing, over the years, that they've just been holding on to, waiting for the right moment to use them for something. Are we going to see a full set of rules for all the various models in the Kings of War range?
In the fullness of time, yes, I think we will. What I think is the focus to start with is the undead, because we've got Mortipus as the sort of antagonist in this first sort of story. We've got the undead to look at, and so there's lots of undead that aren't actually that won't be in the box set. We've got mummies and werewolves and the undead dogs you saw in the first Dwarf King's Hold and so on. And so I think what will be nice is to kind of round out the whole story of the undead. And when we've done that, we need to start thinking about where we go from there. I don't think adding everything all at once is actually going to work. We originally thought we were going to do that. And I think in the end, when we started looking at it and writing lists of what needed to be in, it was such a big list that it's just going to be bonkers. So we've stepped back from that and said, okay, well, we won't put everything in because everything's just too much all at once. Because we'll never be able to get it all playtested and balanced in time. So we thought, we'll focus on the undead, we'll get all the undead sorted, and then we will look to expand on that. What can we do next, basically? And I suspect that the way we will do that is we'll pick an army and deal with that. Because that way we'll able to, rather than just kind of skim along and do a little bit of everything, I think doing a sort of individual force in depth allows you to tell much more story, it allows you to get a better character for the force, because things can work, all the things in the Goblin army can work together, rather than having to just sort of write them separately over several years. You go, right, we're going to do all of the undead, we're going to do all of the goblins, we're going to do whichever side we end up doing. And you get a sort of synergy between the different parts of it that work together and give you a really nice shape of a sort of whole force to be playing with. Because that, of course, when you get to the stage where you're playing the advanced game, when you've got the Necromancer player making dungeons, this is the sort of palette you'll be drawing from, is all the different undead models that we get a chance to include. So, whether he wants to use werewolves or skellies or armored zombies or whatever it is his kind of, that's his menagerie he can pull from. Whereas if he was a goblin leader, he would have a different set of things to pull from, and he'd want the whole story. He wouldn't just want three different choices.
Okay, now before we have a look at the Kickstarter page, first of all, I have had a Ronnie update, and sadly, Google won't let him on naked, and it's just too hot for him to put any clothes on in Spain at this time of year, unfortunately. So
Right.
he's going to be unable to come in, but he has pledged to be on the show again at some point before the Kickstarter ends, so you'll get a double whammy.
Right,
So,
good.
Now, I'm going to go over some audience questions now. Now, my co-host for the night, Stevie, was supposed to be doing this, but he's unfortunately disappeared for the moment, so I'll have to put on yet another hat tonight. Okay, here we go. Kind of along the lines we were just discussing, Thaddeus Moore wants to know if we can expect to see the kind of classic dungeon baddies and stats for them that aren't currently in the range, like manticores, minotaurs, hippogriffs, and that kind of thing. Will we see stats for them, even though no models are available?
Not at the front of the list, I'm afraid. I mean, obviously, as a miniatures company, it would be bizarre for Mantic to start off by, of the big sort of phone directory worth of things it could talk about, picking things it doesn't make models for. So whilst they're classics, and other people might make them, I can't see them being at the front of the list. Eventually, at some point, we may actually make them for the game, rather than saying, they're in the list already, let's do some stats for them. We may decide at some point to do a Manticore or what have you for Dungeon Sagas, and then, there you go. But it's not something that listing random things from D&D isn't really.
If you were starting from scratch and didn't already have a huge miniatures range, then I could understand putting in stats for things that were unavailable.
Yeah, I mean, we do have this quite large and growing range to hand already. So it'll be silly.
Okay, we've got a question here. Now, I'm reliably informed that this has a bit of a joke behind it. It's from Pathfinder Chris. He wants to know, will there be a bard miniature?
Yeah, that's one you really need to ask Ronnie, I think. It's will there be a bard? I think you'll wait. When Ronnie comes on, ask him that. Save that for then.
Is he not a big fan of bards?
I am afraid I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay. Right, the next one. Crimson Sun is asking about some possible plastic or resin terrain. That's going to be part of it.
Well, we've got some card pieces of terrain. So we've got kind of chests and bookcases and whatnot for dungeon terrain to start with. And at some point, it will be nice if we got the funding to make these as 3D pieces instead of just card sort of lay on tiles. When that might be, I don't know. I leave the clever chaps at Mantic to do the ins and outs of the exactly what gets up on which stretch goals when, and that changes all the time anyway in response to what people are saying and where the money is and what people are up to and how many backers they've got that day. And
I imagine it's a balancing act between adding more items and then improving the ones that are already there.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to, on the one hand, you've got a crowd of people. It's crowdfunding, so you've got a crowd of people who want something exciting for their money. They want a good value for money, and like me, I go on Kickstarter and I go, I like that. I don't like that. That suits me. That sounds good. That sounds like good value for money. I do the same thing everyone else does, and so you're trying to be the most appealing thing at the time, because there's always another 100 things people could be spending their money on. So you've got to balance adding value to the existing thing, adding new shiny stuff to tempt people along. It is a bit of a dark art, and as I said, it's not one that I personally am involved in. I sort of see the edge of the magic circles and the chalked patterns on the floor when I go into the office. But it's down to Chris and the guys at the office, I think. It's cunning work.
Okay, there's one here. I'm not sure how related this is, but Nick Williams wants to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how awesome is your most awesome Pathfinder, Nick Williams? Sounds like he wants you to big him up here.
Only Nick knows the answer to that.
There you go.
There you go.
Right. Got one here from Nabiki Shepherd, who is curious regarding the characters for the advanced rules, and they're more customized. Will there be an optional sprue of weapons and gear to add to the miniatures?
I'm not aware of that as a plan. At the moment, the detail of the weapon types doesn't make much difference in the game because you're focused more on the abilities of the actual person using them. So whether they have an axe or a sword, kind of not that important. When we come to sort of more developed magical items, so I've got magic axe or whatever, it's one of those perennial problems with this kind of game. If I'm likely to pick up different weapons as I go along through a dungeon, do I need to change the model if I pick up a magical mace that's better than my magical hammer or my magic sword or whatever? Do I want to change the model every time, and then by the time I finish modeling that and painting it up again, I find a magic axe or a magic banjo or whatever it might be? So how practical is that anyway? I can't see it being a major thing, and certainly tooling it in plastic is going to be very expensive.
I remember playing some board games in the old days where you would have the model and then it would have kind of a huge gap in the middle of its hands, and you could put different weapons in there during the game, but those models weren't incredibly detailed and didn't really lend themselves to being painted.
More like Lego men, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they were sat somewhere between Lego men and normal miniatures.
Yeah, I just think that it ends up being, you end up compromising making nice models, because you can make a beautiful model of a warrior with a sword, and if he'd had a hammer at the beginning, then that would have been fine. He would have also been a beautiful model. But being able to sort of hack it about and swap it in the middle is always going to be compromised in terms of making the miniatures nice, in terms of them being solid during play and not having their weapons fall off every time you pick up the miniature and all of these things. And I think that the sort of abstraction that you need to be able to say, I've got a magic hammer, now I've got a magic sword, and I haven't changed the miniature, is just one that is sort of endemic to role-playing games and this kind of board game, where anything where you can pick up new equipment as you move around is something that you always struggle to represent on a figure. I think you have to say, this is representational of this hero.
The way I would look at it, when your model takes wounds or hit points, you don't start drilling out a hole and painting red trickling down him. So you have to use your imagination a little bit.
You always have to. I mean, and also, I mean, the fact we've got static models and the heroes obviously aren't static and so on. What we have done is the idea within the Kickstarter, and it's Kickstarter exclusive, is that they're doing a set of legendary models, which are basically the hero in a more powerful version. So with better armor, with more kit, with a better weapon, and so on. So each of the heroes, when you replace them, because the heroes get better as they go through the narrative campaign, and we sort of say, right, you've got a card which tells you the stats of the hero and so on, and they pick up bits as they go along. And then at some point during the scenario, we say, okay, right, well, this hero has now got so much extra gubbins that you need to flip over the card, and he's now a legendary status. He's now got so much better. He's now a different sort of level of things, and then you can replace the model with the new model with all the better kit on.
Did I see that those models are made from resin, so they're a different material?
Yes, that's right. They're made of resin, like forgeable stuff. They're made of resin because it's because they're only going to be done for the Kickstarter. There's no practical way they can afford to do them in the same material that they're done for the whole range of the normal miniatures. It's also to do with the fact that the people who pledge for the Kickstarter are likely to be the ones who are that much more kind of, they're proper hobbyists as, gamers. Their gaming is their hobby, rather than someone who's picked it up in Waterstones in a year's time, or who sees it and thinks, oh, that, I'll play that with my son. They aren't going to be bothered about that level of detail and so on, because that's not their hobby. They're not into it in that way. Whereas I think we tend to be talking to a slightly different audience when you're talking to people on Kickstarter about games, because that's their hobby. That's why they're on Kickstarter searching through the games tab, because they're interested in games. That's what they do. That's what they spend their money on. That's what they spend their time on.
Okay, we've got a question from Craig Orgill. He asks, will there be any dungeon-themed clips to hold the tiles together, possibly with attachable card doors?
I'm pretty sure someone mentioned that when we were discussing all the things we could add, and I don't know when it might turn up, but certainly clips were mentioned. I think doors are something that can get to be a pain in the bum because they get in the way. I think the idea of using them as clips, as card things that stick in, because the doors can be opened and smashed through and so on, I think that was a very good way of doing it. So yeah, certainly it's certainly possible. I mean, I'll keep saying this because we're at the beginning of a 25 days or something. The reason for doing Kickstarter is because it funds the things we can do, and that so many of the things we would like to do, we can't afford to do all at once. We have to pick and choose which bits we do. So raising more money means that we can do more stuff, and it's just basically a case of going down the list and saying what's the next coolest thing we can do.
One thing I will say, I'm not really a big fan of clips holding tiles together. The one that springs to mind, I think, was Warhammer Quest that had the really large doors, and when you slotted them in, occasionally they would kind of grind the edges of the card tile a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If they don't hold tightly, then there's no point in them. If they hold tightly, then they might damage your tiles.
And if you put some kind of mechanism in them, then it gets kind of expensive and fiddly, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And then they break if there's something fiddly on them, and so on. So it's a little bit of an engineering problem. It's also a matter of taste. I personally don't like them, but then it's one of those things. It's just a matter of what you prefer. I find that if you put tiles on a shiny table, then they slide around. if you put them on something that, like a table, a matte tablecloth or just a sheet, then they don't slide around nearly as much. I mean, you just have to kind of find whatever works for you. I mean, I like that approach. I'd rather not have my tiles damaged by putting clips on and off. That's just me. That's.
Well, maybe there could be a stretch goal for the people that like to play their board games on cruise ships and whatnot that are constantly going to be moving side to side. Maybe you can give them a roll of blue tack.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that it's something that we have talked about and something that people like, or some people like, and being Mantic, they're happy to provide things that people like. Whether this will be a stretch goal that got added to everything or something that turns up as an add-on, I don't know. And we'll have to see. There are lots of exciting things we could add. It's one of many clamouring for attention.
Right, we've got another question from Thaddeus Moore, who says, any thoughts on adding Henchmen to Dungeon Saga?
Yeah, I did think about that. I mean, when I worked on a computer game, MMO, one of the things I was responsible for was looking after the design documents about Henchmen, which supposedly one of the key features of the game at the time. So I kind of have a sort of soft spot for the whole concept of them in sort of this style of game. It is quite interesting, and I think in some ways it kind of becomes sort of equipment in effect for heroes. Definitely part of the advanced game. It wouldn't be in the core game because it would be extra miniatures to confuse people with, and it always ends up being a slightly odd and sometimes quite complicated way of doing things. Yes, possibly is the answer. It might be one I have to arm wrestle Ronnie for because it will end up with being new models, but we'll have to wait and see, really.
I would look at it like if they can only send 4 or a very limited number of people down into the dungeon, there's not much space down there. Would they really send someone down there just to carry your backpack or hold the torch?
Well, this is the idea, yeah. I mean, this is the idea of carrying on beyond that. Is that in the advanced game, you've got the idea of saying basically you can make up your own dungeons, and so at that point, 4 becomes an abstract limitation and an arbitrary number that we've picked. And so the way I have it in my head, I haven't worked this out yet because I think it's more important to get the foundation of the game solid. Everything, just to sidetrack myself, everything builds on the core being right, and the core concepts and the core mechanics being solid. So there's no point in worrying about what shiny piece of chrome you may at one point put on it is going to do, other than in general sense, because fine-tuning that little mechanic now may be entirely irrelevant if you change something in the core. So I'm more worried about the core at the moment, but the way I was thinking about this was that if you design a dungeon, I'm the Necromancer player, I get to design the dungeon that you guys as heroes get to go and try and beat. So I design a dungeon, and the more I put into it, and the bigger and more complicated I make it, and the more traps I put in, and the bigger monsters I have, the more value that dungeon has as a kind of nominal difficulty, as it were. And then that gives you, as a group of heroes, more points, if you like, to spend on getting stuff. So that could be more heroes. So you go in with 5 people instead of 4. That could be taking fancy equipment. That could be taking a henchman. So when you're playing with something where you say, we're in the realm of you making your own dungeons, you designing dungeons, then henchmen become quite feasible. In the core game, which is a narrative story that we tell you what the story is, so you open the box and you've got a scenario that says, lay out the dungeon like this, the heroes are like that, the necromancer's got these monsters, here is the objective, off you go. The choices you have are on the board in the game, they're not outside that. We give you everything, so it's dead fast to set up, it's easy to work out what you need to do, everything's done for you. When you're in the advanced game, you've got the sandbox. We assume when you're playing that you want all the variation. So basically, it says, right, we're going to take all of the controls you can mess with. You can waggle the levers, you can twiddle the knobs, you can do what you like, and here's how you work it out so it's reasonably balanced. it will obviously be less balanced than a game that we've defined all the parameters and played 200 times. But
there's nothing that says the dungeon has to be an underground crypt. So you could be quite as easily fighting a necromancer in the middle of an open field.
You could be.
When you start designing your own.
Yes. I mean, the gridded board is there for the convenience of movement and whatnot, but it's a gridded board. It could be inside a castle. It could be in a pub. It could be anywhere. So yes, and what I would hope people would do is that they will go. You'll get this mixture of people who go, well, I'm interested in the idea of doing dungeon designs, but I haven't got the time or the internet, or really going to get around to it. So I'll look online and see what people have been up to, and then you'll find the people who are really into it, who get really passionate, who design their own great elaborate dungeons, and then say, right, I've designed this. Here's the map. It's an 800-point dungeon, and off you go. I've done some heroes who work well with it. Here's some heroes as well. And so other people who aren't into that level of intricacy with it get to enjoy the stuff that the community's made. So I think there could be a really exciting sort of symbiosis here where people who want to play one level of dungeon can play that which has been designed not just by us, because we'll do stuff, but then also but giving the community the tools to do it themselves. There can be lots more generated, so we can get all sorts of kind of interesting things going on.
There is one thing I wanted to know about the dungeon tiles, actually, the gridded board area. Will that be compatible with Dwarf King's Hold tiles?
The size of them is the same in terms of the size of the square. The card the new ones are on is going to be thicker than the Dwarf King's Hold one, but I mean, by sticking something underneath the old ones, it's going to work fine.
Yes, people who already have Dwarf King's Hold when they're designing their own dungeons, they can have in mind that they've already got this big stack of tiles to use.
Yeah.
Right.
I think once you've got that, you can potentially start either making your own. I think a lot of games that do this kind of thing are based on a 1-inch or 25mm grid, which is what Dwarf King's Hold is based on and what Dungeon Sagas is based on, and so potentially you can sort of, it's compatible with an awful lot of them things in sort of, by the time you're building your own dungeons and exploring all sorts of strange combinations of bits and bobs, if you've got that kind of collection in your gaming den, then I imagine you'll have quite a lot of things you can pull in.
Now, there's quite an interesting suggestion here from the terrain tutor.
Oh, right.
Yes, and of course the terrain tutor did just build that huge battle zone terrain set for charity, no less. So I think that should give him some points, and he should be actually allowed to put this into the game. He wants to see a naked zombie Ronnie as an addition to the Kickstarter. I think he's earned the right to ask for this.
Yes, he has indeed earned the right to ask. Whether it will happen... Actually, hang on a minute. Haven't we got a Ronnie already? I think we already have.
There is a coach Ronnie in Dreadball, isn't there?
And there's naked zombies. So I think it's a... For any miniature enthusiast, I think the conversion is 5 minutes work.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
As with zombies is often the case.
Yeah, there's a few people. There's a few people who are saying +1 to that idea.
Okay, right. Yes.
So yeah, that's if people want it. Surely it's got to get into the campaign.
Well, I think someone just needs to make sure that gets posted on the comments on Kickstarter. And
I would urge everyone to head there right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, after this show, of course.
We've finished, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely. If people want it, then I can only point and laugh. So.
Right. A question here from. Okay, I'm going to try to pronounce this. Panagoutios Papakos says, "Will we be able to use some more of the good side miniatures in the game as we can with the undead?" So he's thinking the likes of the angels, the nature elementals, and the elves, etc.
In what regard? Potentially, at the moment, the idea of Dungeon Sagas as opposed to Dwarf King's Hold. Dwarf King's Hold is basically where two sides have a force each. So it's a skirmish in a dungeon environment, basically. The thing about Dungeon Sagas is you have the heroes, and once you've got the concept of the heroes on one side and a dungeon full of bad, monsters on the other, a monster just means not a hero in this context. So you could, once you take that idea, you could expand that to be all sorts of things. So it could be a party of heroic abyssal dwarves and demons fighting against those nasty, nasty, smiley good elves.
Yeah, I could just see angels sitting there strumming on their harps when all these heroic evil dwarves just burst in and start smashing everything to pieces.
Yeah.
Kind of images of Monty Python and the Holy Grail and the wedding party to me.
Well, the number of once you've got the concept of the heroes on one side and this force of other creatures on the other side, I think that you can go, well, what heroes do we want? What does that tell us? Do we want a bad, evil heroes and goody dungeon? That's certainly a possibility. And things like angels as heroes would be great.
He's also asking, how would you compare Dungeon Saga to another game called Descent?
I played Descent when it first came out, and I think I may have only played it once. So I haven't played the second edition, and to be honest, I can't really remember it, and I haven't spent the time to go and look and see what it was. I mean, everybody tells me the second edition is better, but it's a bit. What people keep telling me is it's sort of. It's mathematics. It's not story. I don't know whether that's true. That's just what I've been told. I can't say because I haven't played it. Don't know. I'm more interested in designing what I think, and what me and Ronnie and the guys at Mantic, we want to make something that is a great game that we all enjoy, and copying someone else, I think, is kind of pointless. It's difficult because I know that it's a useful reference point for people because they've played Descent and they haven't played Dungeon Saga. So it's useful for me to be able to say it's simpler, it's more complicated, it's thicker, it does this, it does that. But at the end of the day, it's a different thing, and I can't really tell you because I don't know how Descent works.
Okay, there's a question from Rob H, who says he is a Kickstarter backer.
Thank you,
Not sure whether you'll be able to confirm this, but is there a realistic chance of seeing pieces like 3D spell effects and other game aids like that during the project?
There's already mention of the 3D tiles for the Pits of Bones. There are acrylic counters for things like wounds. I'm not sure how much most spells don't last long enough for there to be. You need an effect, if you see what I mean. Most of them kind of happen and then they're gone. But there are a few which do linger, and you're right that might be nice. So what I suggest is mention that on the Kickstarter comments, and I will try to remember to mention that. If I'll write it note down to mention that to the guys, because it's not, that's certainly something that's possible.
Another one from the Terrain Dude here. He's asking if the game will be fine for young children. His are 7 and 9, and he's wondering if they'd be able to play with the minimum of guidance.
I've been told by people at conventions that they've played the original Dwarf King's Hold with their 6-year-olds, and this is no more complicated. In fact, the core game, maybe it's simpler in some ways and not simpler in others. So I would expect that if they've got the kind of children that will play a game normally in any other environment, that they should be able to set them up with this, and then once they've taught them, they should be able to get on with it. But we're talking about the core game, where because obviously if you're 7, then designing your own dungeon is going to be a little bit beyond you, I would imagine. But I don't know. I don't play games with 7-year-olds very often, unfortunately.
There's a little bit of a sly question here from John Simpson, who's asking whether there's going to be a quest to tidy up your office.
Well, brave men have tried and failed, so it is in need of heroes to do this. I was actually talking to someone this morning. I've been looking at at painting racks and how to target painting tables so we can get someone to find the paints when I need them.
Looks like you might need to go around the various kingdoms and round up their finest men.
I think that may be the requirement here. I mean, it's one of those things where it's what I really would find more useful is some TARDIS technology, because I need the room to be bigger inside than it looks on the outside. So I can fit all the accumulated in it.
You can make this into a stretch goal. Let's say it costs £1,000 for this pledge level, then you get to undertake a top secret quest on behalf of Jake.
I was thinking a more fun is it costs a couple of $100 million for this quest, but we do TARDIS technology, because that would be so cool.
Well,
I mean, we've had the X-wing squadrons and the Death Star on Kickstarter, so I don't see why TARDIS should be left out.
Okay, there's a question here from Bazooka J Rambo. I don't know whether you'll know this for certain, but he's asking whether the mould lines are going to be removed from pre-assembled miniatures.
No. I've never seen mould lines removed from pre-assembled miniatures ever.
Neither have I. I've never seen mould lines removed from anything, really.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm working on the assumption that what we will get is something that is of the standard that Mars Attacks has managed or greater. Because all the way through the Kickstarters that I've done with Mantic, the quality of the miniatures has got better and better. And that is partly knowing the process, it's largely knowing the process, because they know sculptors, they know people who can make the originals really nicely. And it's being able to mass produce these in a material that works, and it gets delivered in a way that the end user likes for the amount of money that they've got, blah 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 blah. So it's one of those things where they've just got better and better at it. And I think if you look at the first things they've done and the last things they've done, the quality of the Mars Attacks figures and the kinds of mold lines you get on Mars Attacks figures are far improved. You can't avoid mold lines when you're casting anything in a multi-part mold. It's just the way it is. That's true for any material. The better you do them, the longer you have to develop it, the more time you can spend fine-tuning the exact settings on the machine, because that's what it comes down to. It's what pressure, how long does it cycle for, in seconds, and all the rest of it. When you get that all fine-tuned because you've got an extra month to work with them, then you get the minimum you can feasibly get of mold lines and so on at the end of the day, and you get the best possible result. Now, I have never seen anyone who's done mold lines removed as a before you get them. I have personally paid someone to clean armies for me, because it's the bit I detest. But I didn't want them to paint it for me. I just wanted them to clean the damn things. So I have done that myself. But I hate to think what it would cost to get someone to clean the models in advance.
It's really an industry-wide thing that all the mold lines are generally getting better in all the established companies, aren't they? They're getting finer and finer as the years go on.
Yeah, I think the more established companies are getting better at it because they simply have longer to work out what the process is.
Yeah.
And I think that works as well with the companies that actually make this, because the number of companies that people use, typically Chinese companies that are used by games companies to make toy soldiers, is very small. And these people are used by lots and lots of different companies, and they get better and better at making what their product is. So, yeah.
Okay,
no magic for that. Excuse me, get some more.
Question from Audio Weasel. It sounds like his appetite has been whetted by the undead dwarves that he's seen already, because he's asking about whether there's going to be any orc skeletons.
Firstly, that's a great name. We like Audio Weasel. Yeah. Orc skeletons. I don't think I saw any, but then I don't think I've seen all of the miniatures they've done yet for them. It's certainly a good idea. I mean, I like the idea of non-human skeletons. Oddly, there's less to make than you might think, because something like an elf skeleton doesn't really look a whole heck of a lot different from a human skeleton when it's got all the meat taken off. So orc skeletons might look quite different. Dwarf skeletons obviously are a different height. Halfling skeletons will be entertaining as well. I think it will be a great little bonus to do a whole pack of different random raced skeletons. So I'll add that to my list of things to mention, I think.
There's a question from Gruenhers. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He wants to know how much of the focus of the game is on exploration and dungeon adventure rather than just fighting.
Good question. At the start, what you'll see when there's an alpha set of rules goes up, probably tomorrow, I imagine. And what that is very much stripped back core basic starting point of what the mechanics are like to show you the basic shape of how things work. And then obviously everything builds on top of that. Now, that focus is mainly on moving and fighting because that's the core of the thing, has to be that. Because at the end of the day, you are trying to get past something, and it's they want to stop you. So you kind of have dialectic argument isn't very an interesting thing to do as a gaming function. You generally have to have some kind of conflict. Usually involves swords. So in the core mechanics, one of the things in the core mechanics is about exploring as well. What you have is you set the board up as defined on the scenario. You only set it up to the closed door. Now, the very first training scenarios only have one section. First scenario has two sections. So you set up the first bit, and then until they've opened the door, the heroes don't know what's behind. So they don't, and nothing that's behind can do anything. Now, that kind of exploration where you've got to sort of work out what's next, and potentially there's several doors going in different directions and so on. So in the later scenarios, these get quite elaborate. And exploring that in terms of where you go next, certainly the first time you do it is quite exciting. When you've got to the advanced rules and people are making their own dungeons and you really have no way of knowing until you play it what's behind the door, then it's even better. But so yes, there is an element of it for exploration in the kind of core structure of the way the scenarios are built. As we go along, in terms of the expanded version, we will get the advanced version. We'll get, I think, traps and that kind of thing. Puzzles don't tend to work very well in this environment, I don't think. It's not something that sits naturally in a sort of in a board game with figures and so on. We could do a little sort of, you'll be down to sort of giving people books of Sudoku and things, and I think that would be a little bit odd, not sit totally comfortably.
Speaking of traps and that kind of thing, there isn't a concept for a thief or a rogue type character yet, is there? That's popped up. Is that something that's likely to come?
That I think you've seen so far.
Ooh.
But certainly, a thief would be a classic thing to include in the range of heroes at some stage.
It does seem like that. Let's see. And yes, to Raphael Perry, yes, the game with the miniatures that had the open hands to replace the weapons did feature a Manticore, yes. But he can't remember the name of it either, unfortunately.
I don't know.
Let's see. Okay, from Nabiki Shepherd. Do you think we'll see stairwell tiles to represent layers of the dungeon and delving deeper in?
I'm not planned to at the moment. The reason for that is simply that it's a lot easier to do it on the flat than it is to try and do it as sort of faux 3D. We've discussed all sorts of versions of card or plastic or resin or whatever actual 3D, and I think the practicality is that it isn't practical. That is, and once if you're using tiles, then most of the time you can get a very similar effect in terms of the way the overall story of the scenario plays by simply using the same level. So I think I like the idea of the concept of descending into the dungeon, but I don't think in practice you actually need to represent this literally within a given level. So you could have, you get to the end, you at the end of the scenario you found the stairs down. Cut to the next scenario. Next scenario, you've dropped a level. Now you're on that level doing something. So I think within a given level, because actually at the end of the day, the levels aren't very big, because even though they get spread out, and walking through empty rooms is boring. So there's no need to have a scenario that's full of empty rooms. And walking through rooms which have got bad things in that you've got to deal with takes time. So having a very, very large area with lots of things in that occupy your time makes for a very, very long game. So each scenario tends to be relatively punchy, although they get bigger as they go along.
Okay, there's one here from the Terrain Tutor. What are the chances of an online dungeon creator app?
I don't know. It's been mentioned by a couple of people. I'm not up on. I don't code stuff myself, and I don't know whether Mantic have got anyone on board for this. There's always a number of people, a number of projects bubbling along in the background. But as I spent some years working in computer, I know a lot of people who work in it, and the vast majority of online kind of computer software-based projects don't make it. It's kind of a 95% fallout rate of in every business I've worked with, in every person I know who's worked in the industry, there's a huge failure rate in terms of the number of things you pitch and the number of things that you start work on compared to the number of things that actually make it to a final product. So it is a good idea. It would be something that would be very useful, and I think it doesn't sound on the face of it like it would be that difficult, but
it's one of those things. If Mantic don't do it, someone will pop up and make one. Someone in the community.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that Ronnie's always very happy about is he has a standard licensing agreement. If people want to license stuff, then they can talk to Ronnie and get a license agreement. And I think that would be great. If someone has the passion and the skills to do it, then fabulous. It would save a lot of kind of awkwardness and difficulty in the whole wrangle. To do it that way. But as I said, there may be something already in the works that I don't know about, because it's not something I would directly kind of work with.
Okay, there's a question from Pathfinder Chris. How are large-based miniatures going to work in small corridors?
They won't fit, which is obviously the entertainment value. If you can hide down a small corridor, then the troll can't get you. But if you're hiding down a small corridor, you're probably not doing whatever the scenario objective might be. So that is one of the key things. I mean, when I'm building scenarios with large creatures in which occupy 4 squares, then including little side tunnels that are 1 wide that allow people to get around the back and all that kind of thing is part of the fun and part of the design, so that you allow people to do that. But if you have a place where you can hide, then there has to be a driver to encourage you to be outside of that, to come out and play. Otherwise, the scenario bogs down. So you don't let it bog down. You have to have a reason why the people that can hide don't need to or can't hide if they want to succeed. So it gives you the tension, it gives you the balance. I think it's a lovely. We were talking before about natural rules and rules that are intuitive, and that's one of them. If something is that big, you can't fit down that small space. We've all seen movies with the big monster trying to get the hero, and the hero's hiding down this tiny little narrow bit, and the monster's going rah 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 rah. Heard that in camera? Yeah, rah.
Occasionally they just stick their tongue round the corner.
Yeah, or you get a tongue or a teeth or a face or half an eye or whatever it might be, and that we've all seen that. And I think that image is such a great one that it would be a real shame not to use it. So you've got that. If you're standing right at the front, then it can still attack you because it's next to you. But if you're hidden back in the depths of this little narrow corridor, then the big fat thing can't get you.
Okay, now I believe all the current questions have already been answered. There'll be some people that have tuned in late. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to screen share and I'm going to look at the campaign page.
Sounds technical.
Yes, there we go. I believe everyone can see that.
I can.
Excellent.
I went to travelling mode for a second.
So, it's currently at $233,000. So,
yes. Thank you everyone for that.
If we look here, I believe we've got the next stretch goal that's not been met yet, sitting there. You can see the zombie troll shaman.
Zombie troll shaman, yeah.
That's just such an awesome concept.
Yeah.
It's not something I ever thought I'd see in a game, a zombie troll shaman. You see, those elements seem to conflict with each other somehow, but it looks like it's been pulled off quite well here.
Yeah, I have to say I'm actually very pleased with myself saying that was one of my ideas, I think. All sorts of people chuck ideas into the pot with these, and a lot of them don't make it because everybody just laughs at you when you say it. But I think they've pulled that off really nicely. I think it works really well. It's a weird thing you've not seen before, which is always fun. I mean, anyone who's followed me through designing Dreadball and Dead Zone will know that I like weird alien races, and keep trying to kind of push the envelope here about exactly what races people see in games. Everyone's seen the elf and the dwarf and so on, but you've got to start with some classics. But at the same time, when you've got your classics, once you've kind of got your foot in that door and you're saying we're in this sort of classic territory, there's always room for me. I think, in my mind, there's always room to just do something a little bit wacky, and I think the Zombie Troll Shaman is going to be a kind of signature piece of this.
There's quite a lot of stuff that's already been unlocked. You've got the armoured zombies, dwarf revenants, and I really like those. Yeah,
they're really cool.
Just the concept of undead dwarves is really interesting to me.
And they're also very hard. they're not pleasant to have to fight.
Yeah, I'd like to see a full range of undead dwarves at Kings of War at some point, actually.
Yeah, well, of course, it's their dungeon, so there's likely to be quite a lot of dead ones of them. And then you get the Dwarf King.
Dead to start already.
Who's already
Ghosts, legendary heroes. These are the resin ones, so they'll require a bit of assembly, I imagine. Then
I would expect so, yeah.
Yeah, but it does point it out there.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this is something where it's a Kickstarter only thing. It's something that people get to pick or not. They can buy it if they're interested. If they're not interested, then they're not necessary for they're not required for the game.
Yeah, that one is an add-on, isn't it?
That's an add-on, I think. Yeah.
There's the zombie trolls.
Zombie trolls are free in the box. They just get added to the box content. There you go. There's another resident who talking about upgrades and so on, and replacements for counters and stuff. That's
I like those injury counters, bone piles. They're nice.
Yeah, bone piles. Yeah. And someone was talking about spell effects. So we certainly could look at the spell effects, and I think there's 3 weeks left. I would imagine we'll be able to work out some spell effects to add. I mean, the tricky bit, of course, is how you get them. If everybody's sort of in the middle of a fight or something, how you get into the models to put on a spell effect that's a 3D thing. How do you get to physically put that on without it just falling off or sitting by the side and so on? So it's a little bit of thinking required to work out how that's going to happen, plus a little thinking, obviously, of what spells exactly will work in that way and which ones we need. So
yeah, you would think that a spell effect, say, if you were going to put a spell on a certain area of a room, having a physical piece there seems like it would hinder movement as well, whereas if it was just a little card, you could actually have models walking over it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the bone piles is a card to start with, but obviously, and you can stand on that as a counter. So when we're talking about designing these, it has to be, it's not flat at the top, but it has to be level at the top. So the top of that counter, even though it's 3D, you should be able to stand the model on it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's thinking of, as I said, the spell effects is a lovely idea. I'm not quite sure how practical we're going to be able to come up, but it's just, we've got a couple of weeks left, so certainly something we can consider.
Some more dungeon tiles and furnitures as an add-on there.
And this is for people who want to play the advanced game and want to do their own design of dungeons and just have more stuff so they can build bigger dungeons. And you know what people are like. As soon as gamers get something, they
they're all just a piece of flat card, I imagine. So it's not going to be taking up a lot of space to have tons and tons of tiles.
And it's like Lego. If you want to build something, you want an extra box. Always. Doesn't matter how much you've got. You always want more. And when you're building these dungeons, you start laying it out. You go, if only I had 3 crossroad pieces. If only I had a second room that's this size. It's always whatever you build, you always want another one.
Then there's these Crypt Stalkers, which appear to be just some of the Kings of War undead range.
That's right. It's more of the undead. So when we do the stats for the rest of the undead army, these are models that you can get. These are things that they already made, so they will require assembly. They won't come pre-built.
It looks like a pretty good price as well compared to their usual retail value.
$90 does look pretty good, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so if people want to pick up more undead stuff for the game, there you go. There's a Legendary Heroes add-on.
Yeah. And that's Heroes in resin, because people were asking, oh, the Legendary Heroes come in resin, what about the basic version? And that's another thing where they went, okay, well, fair enough. If you want that, well, we could do the basic ones in resin as well. But that, again, that will only be a Kickstarter exclusive, and it's something that collectors might want, painters might want.
Would they be easier to convert than the other models?
I would have thought less, actually. They should be slightly, and I mean slightly finer detail, because resin holds detail really, really, really well. Well, I don't think it will make a lot of difference, but it might. And obviously, we haven't got the final versions to see, but resin is quite nice to work with. But the plastic, the stuff that the stock figures will be in, will be quite soft. So certainly when you talk about cutting it with hobby knives and scalpels and things. So I would expect the conversion, and also you can heat and bend the stuff they're made of normally. So there's that ability. That, there's lots of things people don't like about it, but that's actually quite a useful ability that is fairly unusual, if not unique to that kind of material. But I think people will buy them because of their detail holding abilities, I expect.
There's an add-on there just to add some more evil.
More dead.
Yeah.
That's more dead from the game. More standard dead from the game. So they'll be coloured plastic.
Yeah, if you just want little sprinklings of everything, so you've got a little bit more of all the undead.
More of them, so you can have real, masses of skeletons or masses of zombies.
Yeah. I do like the skeleton with the scythe, actually. That just take me back to the old school games where all skeletons seem to have scythes.
Yeah, very much an homage to the old school. I think it was Advanced Hero Quest had one a bit like that. It's very much kind of a reminder, a nod to the nostalgia.
Yeah, that's the only thing I was talking about, where you want to recapture the feel of these old games.
Yeah.
Little touches like that, I think, are nice.
Yeah, I think they work very well, because people either just think it's a cool skeleton model, or they recognise it, or they kind of has a resonance with them.
Yep.
You don't lose anything by doing it.
This $100 pledge level is growing all the time, by the looks of it. We're going to have to scroll down the page a few times, I think, in a couple of weeks.
It is, yeah. It is getting bigger and bigger, yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff in there. A few of them Kickstarter exclusive, as they're clearly marked with the big green stamp on them.
Yeah.
So anyone who wants those things better jump on it.
Yeah, I think and also if you want to pick up the resin legendary figures and that kind of thing, they're Kickstarter. But they've added a $1 pledge now. Because originally there was only one pledge at $100 on the early bird version of that. And they've added a $1 pledge to say basically anyone who just wants some figures doesn't need to get the game, you can just get some figures. There you go. So there's 10 people who've jumped on that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. Not everyone is necessarily in a position financially to buy a full game, but they do want some of the miniatures, so I think that's a good move.
And people who are painting may go, oh, I really like those figures, I'll just buy some figures to paint. I don't want to play the game, I don't play games, I just like painting stuff. So,
Yeah, the rate it's going,
hobby.
Currently at 233,000. I don't think it's going to be too long before the Zombie Troll Shaman gets unlocked.
Yeah.
So that's going to be exciting times. So,
yeah. And they're saying,
can you give us any possible sneak preview of anything that you know of that might be coming next?
I don't know is the answer. I mean, I tend not to worry about exactly what order things are going to go in, because I know how much they can change. So they have a plan for what they're going to do and how they're going to run the thing, what order the stretch goals will be in, and so on. And then as soon as it goes live, something different happens from what they expected, and it all has to get shuffled around, and people decide they want something or don't want something, and then you move things back and push things forward. So I don't add to their burden of looking after the logistics of it by nagging them to tell me all the time.
Would you like to give us a little clue as to one thing you might be looking forward to? Just a little clue, just in case it gets reshuffled or doesn't even appear at all. You're not going to be disappointing everybody.
Well, I can tell you one thing I would very much like to see, that I think is going to get in, and I'm fairly sure will get in, but I don't think is actually in at the moment, which is the ability to make your own characters in a very much kind of open sort of way. So, to build your own dwarf heroes. So, at the moment, when you start, you get a dwarf hero, and he's a dwarf fighter, and he works a certain way. And as he goes on through the adventures, he gets better in a certain way. And he gets extra pieces of equipment and so on, but he improves in a sort of set way, because this is the idea of the core game, is that you don't have to make lots of decisions about what you're going to do outside of the actual scenarios. You can just pick it up and play it, and you can go, let's just play Scenario 7. I really like Scenario 7. Let's just have a game of Scenario 7. So you open the box, get it out, tells you what Scenario 7's got, tells you what heroes have got, what the monsters have got, and you can just get on and play it. You don't have to think about anything else. That's great for people who like that kind of game, for people who aren't interested in all the fiddle, and for me when I want to have a quick game. It works great like that. However, there are times when you want to go, I really want to build a particular kind of dwarf hero. I want to do it like this and not like that, and I want to make these choices and not those choices. And that would be really cool to have in the advanced roles. I don't think we're quite there yet, because that's obviously a huge amount of work, plus lots of extra stuff. So yes, and that would enable. I mean, the way I'm thinking that would work is that you'd have, you say, I'm going to take a dwarf, and there's certain racial characteristics that you get for being a dwarf. You allocate some stats. You pick which skills and which feat, which is something we've not discussed, but I'll let you see that in the alpha rules. You pick those things that you want from a list that's available for your combination of race and profession. But there could be several other people, and you might not pick the same ones that I would pick for your ideal dwarf fighter. Maybe mine's more heavily armoured, but he's slower. Yours has got 2 weapons. Whatever. You can imagine all the different permutations. Obviously, with things like spellcasters, there's a whole wealth of different magic you could have, and we give you one option at the start. We give you one choice from that set of possibilities. So I really quite like the idea of being able to get into the nitty-gritty of how you build characters. And then obviously once you've got that, you've got the idea of them getting better as they go along, linking together scenarios into your own campaigns, not narrative one you've got. You play the narrative one, or you replay the narrative one with your own heroes. So you fight the same things, but you've got different heroes than you start with, and then they get better and learn experience in different ways. So there's all sorts of options in that way. So I really think the big thing for me to do next, in terms of design, in terms of expanding the way the game can kind of blossom after you start off with this solid core, where can you take it? It's the mutability of characters, the mutability of development of characters that were really exciting.
Now, I believe it funded its original target in about 4 minutes, didn't it? I think I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, 4 minutes was what I was told, yeah.
Do you know if that's a record?
Apparently Zombicide did it in 3.
Well, you got something to shoot for with the next one then, haven't you?
Yeah, close though.
When it comes to the previous Mantic Kickstarters, do you compare them to each other and say, well, I hope it does better than this one, or do you just look at them as individual projects that are going to have different appeals?
Well, I think there's always when you're working out what you might need to do for it, obviously you've got to say, well, we need to get this much money to make it happen at all, and then what would we like to do, and how much will that cost us to make the tooling or print the things or whatever. Excuse me. So you look at other things that you think might have been similar, and say, what do we expect to get? What do we think we might get? How well do we think this will do? How do we plan out our strategy for stretch goals and things compared to what we've done last time or the time before? Although in my experience, every single time we've done it, it's not done what we thought it would do quite, because it's such a variable. I mean, there's so many things going on that can change how well a Kickstarter does, many of which aren't in your control, especially what else is on Kickstarter. at the time. That's obviously completely outside your control and has a massive impact on what happens, how many people come and join in.
Doesn't it just Kickstarter anything that's just released suddenly without any warning in the industry? Suddenly people start backing out of pledges because they need that money now to buy this thing that they've just seen.
Yeah. People, I mean, and I mean, you know, Mars Attacks went backwards briefly in the middle of it. Because obviously the middle of any Kickstarter is the slowest part, where a few people are joining and you're getting less money coming in. Because everybody, you know, people have joined that were going to, and people that aren't joining because they're waiting to see at the end, aren't joining because they're waiting to see at the end. So you look at this lull in the middle. If you look at Kicktrap, you see this in every Kickstarter. And several Kickstarters I've seen, and Mars Attacks, which I was involved in, went backwards slightly in the middle. And this is obviously, it's a horrible sensation when you've done all this work and you've got all this passion for the project and you've got all of these things that you're planning to do, and then suddenly the sort of ground starts falling away from underneath you. And you know, I mean, this happened very famously and rather horribly with Gates of Antares, and it happened again recently with when I was backing myself as a customer called Fallen Heroes, I think it was called. I can't remember anyway. But you know, it's one of those things, and you just see this thing, and it's kind of you can see sometimes what you need to do. I mean, obviously we turned around what happened with Mars Attacks, and it carried on and was very successful in the end. But some people can't do that, and it's not always their fault. I think sometimes it's just the combination of circumstances. It's what's happening elsewhere on Kickstarter. It's all sorts of things that may not necessarily be in their control. So it's a very much a strange process. Is crowdfunding. It's
not just a case of stick the campaign on and then see what happens. You've got to constantly be looking around what's going on and amending your campaign to compensate.
Yeah, I mean, people want, you know, want to know things about it. I mean, they're paying, you know, they're offering to pay you some money on faith because they're not going to get, you know, it's not like buying it on Amazon. It'll be at your door the next day. This is on faith. You're saying it's going to take you 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever it's going to take. And although Mantic have delivered everything on time, many Kickstarters are late. It's very common for Kickstarters to deliver after they said they would. So even if they say 8 months, sometimes you get it in 9 or 10. Or looking at one yesterday that's I think 6 months after it said it would be, and it already said it was going to be 8 months. So you know they're a year and a bit afterwards, and the people who pledged for that are still waiting for something. So you've got to talk to people. You've got to get them on board with what you're doing. You've got to listen to what they want. I think Mantic have learned to do this very effectively, and actually learned to respond to what people wanted. So, I mean, even from the very first one, the Kings of War Kickstarter, I can't remember which way around this was, but Ronnie thought everyone was Ronnie thought everyone was going to want heroes and not so much regiments, and then everyone turned out to want regiments and not heroes, or it was the other way around. I forget which way around it was. So the plan to do lots of one ended up being changed to do lots of the other because people didn't want that. And I think that means that for any business, you want to provide something that the market wants. People want stuff, but if you provide the wrong stuff, then you end up with a warehouse full of rubbish you can't sell, and then your business goes bust, and then everyone loses because the customers don't get more cool things; they get less stuff. So it actually suits everyone if the producers of things, game producers, make things the market wants, because the market gets the cool stuff they want, and the producers stay in business. So it's great because you can get people, you know, you can say, what do people want? Do they want A or B? Which one do you want? We could do one or the other. Which one do you want? And tell us, and people will tell you. So the best bit on this number on the Facebook, not the Facebook, the Kickstarter page. The best bit is the number of backers. There's more than 2,000 people have backed this, and that's an instant community that can talk to you about this, and you can say, here's something, what about this? What about that? How about this idea? And you can get kind of live feedback from people who are willing to put their hands in their pockets and say, yes, I will join in.
Well, there's a few more audience questions, and then we'll do Poem of the Week, and then we should be able to start wrapping it up then.
Okay.
So, a question from Spoony J. Could you see this game selling blister packs of special characters?
I think it's unlikely we'll sell blister packs. the discussion I was in, which was admittedly at least a month ago, so it may have changed, was if we get to the point where we're doing extra stuff, what would be cool would be to do things in packages, so that you're doing you don't just buy a hero, you buy a couple of heroes, or 1 or 2 heroes, plus some monsters, plus a little dungeon to play in. So you get a kind of package of things, because that's much more fun than just saying here's one more model. Kings of War has a vast range. If you want to get the odd model, then there's plenty of things you can take from Kings of War. There's no real need for Dungeon Sagas to kind of do that again. But I think what Dungeon Sagas can do is to do another exciting adventure. This time it's with a bunch of goblins. So you've got a goblin slaying hero, a specific kind of hero that fits with that story. You've got a story, you've got some narrative scenarios you can play with the core game, then you've got some extra tools and toys you can play with the advanced game, plus maybe a tile or two. So you get a little package, a kind of campaign package. That's how I think they're going to do this. Because I think that's how it's kind of, it's set up. At the same time, if he's playing and he decides he wants to do a specific hero, and they don't have a model for it in whatever he's got so far, or he wants a particular model, then the range is already quite big, and I think you can pick and choose from the Kings of War range.
Okay, let's see. Nathan Green was asking if there's any possibility of the legendary heroes in plastic, but I think kind of covered that.
Yeah, there's just no way they'll afford to be able to do that.
Yeah, you don't really see limited run things in plastic.
No, you don't. And the reason is very simply it costs too much.
Yeah.
No one would pay
Wilkinson.
No one would pay the price that you would have to charge.
Matthew Wilkinson's asking any chance of an add-on for 10 or 20 skeletons, perhaps. He's a skeleton fan. There
were already packs. You mean 10 skeletons and nothing else?
I think that's what he wants, yeah.
Well, you could just go to the Kings of War range and buy some skeletons. They come in packs of skeletons and nothing else, so...
They are nice and cheap. And you get a little skeleton dog in there as well.
Or is it a rat? There was always this debate.
Yeah, is it a really big rat or a small dog?
A giant rat or a small dog? It's hard to say by the time its skin and fur and everything else has fallen off.
Okay, so I think it's that time of the week where...
That time of the week?
Arguably the most delicious part of the show, which is the poem of the week. Okay, here we go. Are you prepared for some art?
I shall have to get my hair in order. I shall sit up. Art.
Okay.
Hit me, Andy. Hit me with the art.
Dungeon Saga, Dwarf King's Quest, Zombie Troll Shamans and Treasure Chests, Dungeon Crawling Adventure like the days of old, the next big thing, if I may be so bold, crashing through stretch goals like axe through bone. For just $100, it can be yours to own. So roll the dice and step into the fight. Tremble in your boots as well you might. Draw your steel and put it to the test with Dungeon Saga, Dwarf King's Quest.
Hey!
See, we normally have more people in here, so the round of applause is a bit more vigorous.
Yes, absolutely. Perhaps you need a sort of reverb or something like it.
You need to have a word with Google to get them to change their policy on naked people entering the Hangouts.
That's what post-production's all about, is making the applause sound more full and vibrant.
Well, I think this may have been a record for live viewers on this episode. At one point we had 78, I saw. So that is quite healthy.
Good, good.
So I'd like to thank you for joining us. Well, joining me as it turned out. My little comrade had some connection issues halfway through.
Oh, they just couldn't stand the heat.
It did get a little bit exciting in here. It was an emotional experience, as it always is on this show. Yep. So everybody, keep your eyes peeled, because we'll have some kind of episode next week, I'm pretty sure. So if you're not subscribed to this channel, do it. And also check out the Chilling Wargamers Facebook page for more information on upcoming episodes. And then in a couple of weeks, hopefully we'll be able to get Ronnie on the show, and we'll have even more juicy stretch goals to talk about with him. And you know what he's like, we'll be able to tease some information out of him, whether he likes it or not. So.
And you must mention bards.
Yes. We will mention bards at great length to him. So if anyone has any Bard-related questions, just store them up.
Store them up
for next time. So thank you for watching, everybody, and see you again soon. Ta-ta! And I have to find the stop broadcast button.